Worldcomedue. Elite Children's Classics.
Romeo and Juliet. Chapter 1. In the city of Verona, Italy, there lived two wealthy and important families, the Capulets and the Montagues. For many decades, both families had been feuding with each other. However, because the disputes were from a time so long ago, no one in the city understood why they hated each other so much. One day, there arose another quarrel between them, which almost brought about bloodshed in the peaceful city courtyard. Servants from both houses had drawn swords against one another, in an attempt to protect the honor of the families they served. Benvolio, a young nephew of the Montague family, having just arrived in the courtyard, saw the brawl and tried to stop it. "There is no reason why you should be fighting," he said to the servants. He raised his sword to make his point clear. Tybalt, a nephew of Mr. Capulet and an enemy of the Montagues, on seeing this, mistook Benvolio's drawn sword as an affront to his family. He challenged him to a fight. Both nephews fought against each other, while a crowd of citizens who abhorred fighting gathered in protest. As a result of all the noise, Mr. and Mrs. Montague and Mr. and Mrs. Capulet came into town and witnessed the fighting. Both proud men nearly joined in. Before anyone was hurt, however, the ruler of Verona, Prince Aeschylus, broke it all up. He exclaimed, "Unless your families make peace, someone will pay the price of this feuding with his or her own life." The crowd then left for their homes. Lady Montague, on her way home, asked Benvolio where her absent son, Romeo, was. She was relieved that he was not involved in the fighting, but thought he was acting very strange lately. Benvolio reported that he saw Romeo sitting under a tree at sunrise. On seeing me, he ran into the woods for fear of being spoken to, said Benvolio. No one understood what was causing Romeo's strange behavior, but Benvolio, who was a cousin and also a good friend of Romeo's, was determined to find out. Soon, he met him and asked him. Romeo answered, "I am in love with a beautiful girl who loves someone else. Her name is Rosaline. I can't be with her because she doesn't love me." After listening to him carefully, Benvolio gave him advice. He believed that young men could easily fall in love. He told Romeo that if he wanted to, he could easily find another lover. He suggested that he and Romeo go to a party that evening. He knew that Rosaline would be attending it. "At the party," said Benvolio, "we can see if Rosaline is the most beautiful girl in all Verona. Perhaps you may find someone you can love more than Rosaline." Romeo finally assented to go. The party was being held at the Capulets' house. All of the guests were supposed to disguise themselves. Although it would be dangerous to go there, Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio, a close relative of the prince and a friend of Romeo's, agreed that they would risk it. At about that same time, in the Capulet's house, Lady Capulet, her daughter Juliet, and a nurse were preparing for the party. While they were getting dressed, they talked about marriage. Juliet, who was not even 14 years old and very beautiful, had a handsome and rich suitor whose name was Paris. At the party, you should decide if you can love Paris or not, said Mrs. Capulet to Juliet. Juliet was not interested in the plan, but finally she agreed to it. That evening, the guests had all assembled in the Capulets' garden. Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio arrived secretly. Mr. Capulet welcomed all of his guests, unaware that Romeo and Benvolio were there. While dancing, Romeo was suddenly struck by the radiant beauty of one of the ladies on the dance floor. I have never seen such a beautiful girl in all of my life, he said. Tybalt overheard Romeo speaking and at once recognized that he was behind the mask. He became furious that Romeo dared to attend his family's party. He told Mr. Capulet of his presence. Mr. Capulet wisely advised him, however, not to pay any attention to him. Tybalt acquiesced. However, he said to himself that he would pay Romeo back at a later date. Romeo, blinded by his love for the girl, whose name was Juliet, approached her. After talking with her very briefly, he kissed her twice. Juliet immediately fell in love with him. On seeing the two young lovers acting so intimately, Juliet's nurse ordered Juliet to come home with her immediately. Before they left, Romeo, who was not aware that Juliet was a Capulet, asked the nurse who Juliet was. The nurse said she was the daughter of Mr. Capulet. I have a serious problem, said Romeo. I am in love with an enemy of my family. Juliet asked her nurse the same question. On learning his identity, she felt very sick. Chapter 2. After the party, Romeo escaped from Mercutio and Benvolio. He ran towards Juliet's house. He hoped to get a glimpse of her from her bedroom window before she retired. As he roamed towards her backyard, he could hear her complaining aloud from her balcony. Juliet moaned, "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, why are you Romeo? Deny your father, refuse your name, for my sake, or, if you will not, be but my sworn love, and I no longer will be a Capulet. Our families hate each other, but why must Romeo be my personal enemy? Names are not so important. The name Montague is only a name. A rose, for example, would always smell like a rose, even if we gave it another name to describe it." Romeo happily overheard every word she spoke and called to her from the garden. She was surprised and happy to hear his voice, but nervous that he might be seen by someone. "Romeo," she said, "I love you very much, but you must leave here now, before you get caught. It is too dangerous for you to be here." While they were calling to each other, Juliet's nurse requested Juliet to come inside. Before Juliet went in, Romeo said, "Send a messenger to me tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. She said, "All right, but I won't sleep at all tonight." "Please, try to sleep," said Romeo. "I must visit the Friar Lawrence now and ask him to help solve our problem. Juliet, I love you." Romeo left quickly and reached the friar's house safely. He explained to the friar his feelings for Juliet. The friar was very surprised to hear this, because the day before, Romeo had told him that he was in love with Rosaline. The friar, a kind and wise man, said, "Perhaps your love is not from your heart, but from your eyes. You love so quickly, Romeo. Are you sure that now you love Juliet? You should be careful, because someone might get hurt. Your feelings should be considered very carefully." "Yes," said Romeo, "I love Juliet very much, and I want to marry her as soon as possible. Will you marry us?" After much hesitation, the friar replied, "Perhaps your love for Juliet is true. It may stop the fighting between your families. If you marry Juliet, your families will be united, and then all of Verona will be pleased. All right, I'll do it." After Romeo left the friar in a happy mood, he met his friends. It was nearly 9 o'clock in the morning. Benvolio and Mercutio began to joke between themselves because Romeo, once again, was in love. They had learned, however, that Tybalt Capulet had sent a letter to Romeo and challenged him to a duel. Romeo was too much in love to even notice this problem. At 9 o'clock, Juliet's nurse arrived to receive Romeo's message. The nurse said, "Juliet loves you. Please don't play games with her feelings." "I love Juliet, I swear," said Romeo. "Tell her to meet me at Friar Lawrence's house at noon. We shall be married then." The nurse left. She told Juliet Romeo's plan. Romeo then prepared himself for his marriage. He went to the friar's house and waited for her. While Romeo and the friar waited, the latter gave Romeo some important advice. "Love moderately. Your love for Juliet is too passionate. It may cause you some problems unless you are very careful," he warned. At noon, Juliet knocked on the friar's door. She rushed inside and kissed Romeo. At last, they were together, and they immediately got married. After they were husband and wife, they separated. Juliet went straight home. Chapter 3. Romeo walked into town after he was married and saw his friends. Tybalt was challenging Benvolio and Mercutio to a fight. When Tybalt saw Romeo, he turned to him and shouted, Draw your sword, or are you afraid to fight me? Romeo answered, You have not hurt me in any way. Why should I fight? I want to be your friend. Romeo was thinking about how much he loved Juliet. Tybalt was Juliet's cousin, and Romeo wanted to make peace because he loved Juliet so much. Tybalt, however, was anxious to pay Romeo back for attending his uncle's party without an invitation. He drew his sword. Romeo protected himself. He shouted, We should not fight. Prince Aeschylus would be very angry. But it was too late. Tybalt ran towards Romeo very fast, missed him, and accidentally plunged his sword into Mercutio. I am hurt, said Mercutio. Please, take me away from here. Speaking to both Romeo and Tybalt, Mercutio moaned. This fighting between your families will probably kill me. Romeo was confused and angry because it was he that Tybalt was trying to kill, not Mercutio. He drew his sword against Tybalt in a fit of rage and stabbed him. He then ran away in panic. The prince and many citizens, including some Capulets, quickly rushed into town to see what had happened. They were horrified to see so much violence. Benvolio explained to the prince exactly what had happened. He told him that Romeo urged Tybalt not to fight, but that Tybalt didn't listen to him. The prince weighed carefully what Benvolio said. News had then just arrived that both Mercutio and Tybalt were dead. He was very sad that his kinsman and Tybalt had been slain. He determined that Romeo should be severely punished. He exiled him from Verona forever. After hearing the prince's edict, Juliet's nurse returned to the Capulet's house and told Juliet the news. I wish a horrible end to Romeo. He has killed our kinsman, the nurse said. Oh, my poor husband Romeo, Juliet retorted. Why did he kill my cousin Tybalt? I can't believe that he would kill Tybalt unless Tybalt wanted to kill him first. She wiped her eyes and said she was comforted to know that at least her husband was still alive. But because he was banished, she became withdrawn and depressed. We must pay our respects to Tybalt, said the nurse. Oh, I can't because I wouldn't be crying for Tybalt. I would be crying because Romeo has been exiled from Verona forever. Nurse, please find Romeo and give my ring to him. Tell him to meet me before he leaves Verona. This is horrible. Romeo and I have been married only for a few hours. Juliet's nurse took the ring and searched for Romeo everywhere. Finally, she went to the friar's house and found him there. She told the friar and Romeo everything she knew. On hearing how sad Juliet was that Tybalt was dead and that he was banished, Romeo tried to take a dagger to his heart. The nurse grabbed it away from him seconds before he could kill himself. Trying to kill yourself won't help, said the wise friar. Be stronger, Romeo. You are very fortunate to be alive. According to the law, you could have been executed. The prince has been very kind to you. We must make a plan. First, you must visit Juliet one last time, as she wishes. Secondly, you must go to Mantua and stay there until I write a letter to you. While you are away, I will try to convince the prince to allow you to return to Verona. Now, please go. It's late."
"This is a good plan. Here is Juliet's ring. She asked me to give it to you, Romeo,"
said Juliet's nurse. Romeo took the ring. He then left to visit Juliet to say goodbye forever. The nurse followed Romeo back to the Capulets' house. When she arrived, she heard the Capulets talking with Paris, Juliet's suitor. He was asking about Juliet's condition since Tybalt's death, because Mr. Capulet didn't know that Juliet was married to a Montague. He thought that Juliet was crying so much because Tybalt had been slain. Mr. Capulet had a plan to make Juliet happy. He advised Paris that he and Juliet should get married in 3 days. He told his wife to inform Juliet that it was his wish that she do so. "I want to marry Juliet and make her happy. Thank you, Mr. Capulet. You have made me the happiest man in all Verona," said Paris. The night quickly passed. Until the crack of dawn, Romeo and Juliet were speaking with each other in Juliet's bedroom. Seconds before sunrise, Juliet's nurse told her that her mother was approaching. When they heard her coming, both sadly said goodbye. They kissed quickly, and Romeo reluctantly left for Mantua. When Mrs. Capulet entered Juliet's room, she was surprised that Juliet was wide awake. Juliet disguised her real feelings and said she couldn't sleep because she was mourning Tybalt's death. Juliet's mother believed her. She said, "Juliet, you are crying so much, but I bring you good news. Now, please be more bright. Your father wishes you to marry Paris in 3 days. I hope that this will make you more cheerful. Paris loves you very much." "I will never marry that man," said Juliet in protest. Mr. Capulet overheard her words. He was very angry that Juliet could be so disobedient. He told her if she did not marry Paris, he would disown her. Juliet begged her mother to help her, but she refused because she agreed with her husband. They both left disappointed, not understanding why she was being so defiant. Privately, Juliet asked her nurse for advice. She told her that she could only love Romeo, but the nurse told Juliet to forget about Romeo and to marry Paris, because Romeo was banished from Verona, and probably would not be able to see her for many years. The nurse thought that it was the best thing for her to do. "You should go to the friar's house and ask him for an annulment," said the nurse. Juliet didn't know what to do. She felt she couldn't trust her nurse anymore. She pretended that she agreed with her and said that she would quickly go to the friar's house and ask for his forgiveness. If all else fails, she thought to herself, she could easily kill herself. Then her problems would be over. Chapter 4. When Juliet arrived at Friar Lawrence's, Paris was talking with the friar. She became frustrated and angry with Paris because he was so deeply in love with her. She wished that he would leave her alone. She said frankly to him, "I don't love you." Although Paris was disturbed by this remark, his love for her was too strong to recognize that she really meant it. Juliet told him that she had to speak privately with the friar, and reluctantly, Paris left. The friar already knew that Juliet's father had ordered her to marry Paris because Paris told him everything. Fortunately, the friar had a solution to her problem. He offered her one slim possibility, though it was very dangerous. He told her that she must pretend to everyone that she would marry Paris the following day. He said, "When you go to bed tonight, take this small bottle of medicine. It will make you appear dead. You will sleep for 42 hours. Anyone who sees you will think that you are dead because your body will be very cold, and it will be impossible to detect your breath. I will prepare everything after that. When you wake up in your family's tomb, Romeo will be in your arms, and you can both leave for Mantua. I will send a letter to Romeo telling him of our plans." With the medicine, Juliet left for her house feeling elated.
"Finally," she said, "I have the chance to be with Romeo."
She told her family, as directed by the friar, that she had changed her mind. She would marry Count Paris. Everyone was happy, especially Mr. Capulet. Then, with a big smile on her face, Juliet told her family that she needed to prepare for her wedding day. She and her nurse went upstairs together. When they were alone in her bedroom, Juliet asked her to let her sleep alone that night. "I have many things to think about this evening," she said.
"I understand,"
said the nurse. She thought that Juliet was making a wise decision to forget about Romeo and start fresh with Paris, so she left. Little did she know that Juliet was preparing to escape from her family forever. As soon as the nurse left, Juliet drank the medicine and flung herself onto her bed. She didn't bother to change her clothes. Before she fell into a deep sleep, she thought many sad thoughts.
"What if I never wake up after taking this medicine?"
she thought.
"Well, it's better for me to be dead than to marry Paris. And I trust the friar. He wouldn't let any harm happen to me."
Soon, she fell into a deep sleep. In the morning, Juliet's nurse came to wake her up. Just as the friar had predicted, Juliet looked dead, because only the friar and Juliet knew the secret. Everyone in the Capulet house began to wail. Lady Capulet and Mr. Capulet were dismayed. Everyone was very surprised, including Paris, who is heartbroken that on his wedding day, his bride-to-be was dead. As planned, the friar directed everyone to prepare for Juliet's funeral. Mrs. Capulet, Mr. Capulet, Paris, the nurse, and Friar Lawrence sadly went to the tomb to say their last prayers for Juliet. Chapter 5. Romeo never received the letter stating the details of Friar Lawrence's plan. The friar's messenger was detained before he was able to get to Mantua. Unfortunately, Romeo's personal servant delivered the news to Romeo that Juliet was dead. The messenger didn't know that Juliet was only sleeping.
"I must see her. If I cannot be with Juliet while I am alive, I will be with her in death,"
said Romeo. Romeo went to an apothecary. He asked him to give him some powerful medicine that would kill him instantly. The medicine, the apothecary warned, was strong enough to kill 20 people. Romeo bought it and left Mantua for Juliet's tomb. Paris was strewing flowers in tribute to Juliet when Romeo approached the tomb. Paris recognized him immediately. He thought Romeo was going to do something shameful to the dead body, so he challenged him to a fight. They fought. Romeo fatally stabbed him, as Paris had requested from his last living breath. Romeo laid him next to Juliet's body. He then gazed at Juliet and began to cry.
I cannot live without my wife,
he cried. He took out the poison and drank it. He kissed Juliet. He died as he fell to the floor. Friar Lawrence arrived moments later and saw the dead bodies on the floor. If he had arrived 1 minute before, he could have prevented Romeo from killing himself. Juliet slowly awakened from her long sleep and saw the catastrophe around her. She was incredulous. She told the friar that waking and seeing Romeo dead was the worst thing she could ever imagine. Suddenly, the friar heard a noise coming from the guards outside the cemetery. He told Juliet that he had to run away. If the guards caught him in the vault, he could be severely punished. He was very afraid.
Come with me now, Juliet. We must leave this place. You cannot stay here either.
The approaching guards had lit torches in their hands, which made the tomb very bright. Friar Lawrence, seeing how close they were, departed without Juliet. She had refused to go with him. Juliet, in the torchlight, kissed Romeo. She noticed that his lips were still very warm. She could also taste the poison. She then took his dagger from him and stabbed herself. She died quickly. When the friar was running from the cemetery, he was caught by several guards. He was detained until the prince arrived at the vault. The prince called the Capulets and the Montagues and had them all gather around Romeo's, Juliet's, and Paris's dead bodies. There was much blood. With many tears in his eyes, the friar explained everything to the Capulets, the Montagues, and the prince. Everyone listened carefully. There were many tears. After the friar told everything he knew, Mr. Capulet gave his hand to Mr. Montague in friendship and vowed that he would not fight with the Montagues ever again. Mr. Montague promised the same thing. He told Mr. Capulet that he would erect a gold monument of Juliet. Mr. Capulet said he would erect one of Romeo also. The prince then spoke gravely of all the suffering and turmoil that love and hate had caused both families. Romeo and Juliet were dead, and nothing could ever bring them back to life, not even their love for each other. The prince said,
These two lovers will be famous one day because their story is so tragic.
Everyone was silent.